Welcome, everyone, to our April 12th webinar, Supporting Students with Executive Function Challenges. My name is Christine Lai, and I am the Executive Director and Co-Founder of Special Education Legal Fund. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. Wait a second. Apologies. Is this working? Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
You can see
Can see the toolbar up top. Right now, you're not in present mode. There you are.
No, now here I am. This is in the slideshow. Apologies. Like I said, every time it's like a brand new, it's a brand new experience. Slideshow. Here we go. All right. Supporting students with executive functioning needs. I knew that was, the screen that I wanted. First off, this evening, I'd like to thank our corporate sponsors, without whom this webinar series and so much of what we do would not be possible. At the platinum level, I would like to thank WealthSpire Advisors for their support and partnership. At the gold level, I'd like to thank Winston Preparatory School for their long-term support and friendship. Our silver friends, American School for the Deaf, Eagle Hill School, Fusion Academy, Villa Maria School, and you might not be able to see behind the little, the sidebar, but that's Chapel Haven Schliefer Center. We're very, very grateful to all of our silver level sponsors and our bronze level sponsor, Shrub Oak International School. We are, again, very, very grateful for everyone's support. Without your help and friendship, much of what we do is not possible. So thank you to all of our corporate sponsors and friends. For those of you who don't know, for whom this is new to you, Special Education Legal Fund is new to you. Special Education Legal Fund is a nonprofit organization founded in 2018 to provide resources, knowledge, and support to families in need with children in the special education system. That primarily comes through this webinar series, the Parent Education Series, as well as our grants programs for families, the Legal Assistance Program and the Advocacy Support Program. And I'll talk a little bit more about those two programs in a minute. If you have questions or want more information about Special Education Legal Fund, please visit our website, which you can see here, and I will, be happy to put in the chat later on. I mentioned our Legal Assistance Program and the Advocacy Support Program. These are, our flagship grant programs for families, and they are in their last grant cycles of the 2022-2023 school year. April and May will be the last months of the year, and we will close for the summer as we normally do and reopen again in the fall of 2023. We are currently accepting applications for April through the 15th of this month, which is basically, the end of this week. And we, through this program, provide families in need with legal support of up to $5,000 from a qualified special education attorney. Through the Advocacy Support Program, we provide families in need with up to $1,000 in advocacy support from a qualified non-attorney special education advocate. And if you are interested in either one of these programs, or you would like to begin the application process, please visit our website, which is, www.spedlegalfund.org, and click on the button that says apply for a grant, and it will bring you to the page where you will begin the pre-screening process for us. Our next webinar is also our last webinar of the school year, and that is going to be about preparing for college, which is a topic near and dear to my heart, as I have a student who's graduating in June and heading off to college. And so when you start that process, you think about, all the things, getting your child, into college is obviously important. Finding the right college is important, but then you're there and, you're at that point and you're about to, to launch. And, what do you do? What does the accommodations process look like? How is that different than, the IEPs that most of our students have carried during high school? What legal documents as a parent should you have before your child goes off to college, so that you can account for, any sort of issue that might arise while your child's away, an hour, 5 hours, even more than that away from you. So, and then finally, what do you do if, the college that you've selected for your child or university doesn't have the appropriate supports, or it seems like your child might need more supports when they get there? So we're really, really pleased to have a great panel for this webinar on May 3rd. Marion Walsh from Littman Crooks will talk to us about accommodations, the accommodations process for both academics and living. Tabitha Mancini from Winston College, or Winston in College, I should say, will talk to us about a brand new program that Winston is launching to provide support for students who need it at the college level. And finally, Alessandra Long, attorney at law, will discuss the legal documents that, really all students need, not just students with special education needs or 504 plans or whatever. So we're really excited for this. It'll be moderated by me. And you can register through the same, Eventbrite channel that you used to log in and register for this webinar. So first of all, I would like to welcome Jeanette Glover to our panel. Jeanette comes to us from Eagle Hill School in Greenwich, and this is her first time as a webinar panelist. So we're incredibly pleased to have her. Jeanette is a specialist in helping students reach their learning potential through direct instruction of learning strategies in the classroom. And she recognizes that in order for students to learn and learn successfully, the curriculum must be made available to students with all different types of learning styles. She works extensively with students at Eagle Hill School as a reading tutor, and is here to share with us how she and Eagle Hill support students' executive function needs both inside and outside the classroom. So welcome, Jeanette.
Thank you.
Next, we would like to welcome back Maggie Gregory from Fusion Academy in Greenwich and Westchester to our panel. Maggie is the head of school at Fusion Greenwich and Fusion Westchester in White Plains, and is an expert on small group education and individualized learning. Maggie's a frequent guest on S.E.L.F webinars and a longtime friend of both S.E.L.F and my family. And we're really, really grateful for both Fusion and its flexible learning model. So welcome back to our webinar series, Maggie.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Next up, we are super pleased. We've got a lot of new panelists this evening, a lot of new blood, fresh meat. And we're thrilled to welcome Ellen Levenson from Waverly Group to our panel. Ellen is an executive function coach and is a specialist in breaking down problems for students so they can more effectively learn and live, because executive function is not just something that happens, between 8 and 4. Although Ellen has a master's degree from Harvard in education, her most important qualification, and the one that I have as well, not for executive function, but for other stuff, is that she's the mother of twin boys who are creative and wonderful, and they also struggle with executive function challenges like so many of our kids do. So welcome to our panel, Ellen.
Hi, thank you.
Next, I'd like to welcome Dr. Lauren Riordan to our panel on executive functioning challenges. When I first thought of this panel, this idea popped into my head. Lauren was the first person that came to my mind. This is like my 4th attempt to get Lauren on a panel, and I'm like ecstatic to have actually succeeded. She has a rare gift of insight when it comes to children with challenges of all kinds. She's an incredibly talented and gifted psychologist. I am very blessed to have been able to work with her multiple times over the course of the past, 12 years, something like that. Together with her colleague and Waverly Group co-founder, Elisa Rohde, the Waverly Group really has been with us almost every step of the way, from, where we were in elementary school to where we are right now on the cusp of college. So we've been through multiple school transitions with you guys, and I could not be more grateful for your knowledge and wisdom and support over the years. So welcome, Dr. Lauren Riordan.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
And last but not least, we are so pleased to welcome Beth Sugerman back to our S.E.L.F webinar series. Beth has been head, this is a little, bittersweet, not that you're getting away from us, but Beth has been head of Winston Preparatory School in Norwalk since 2007.
Correct.
something like that. And she's been a significant partner in so many of the journeys of so many families in the New York and Connecticut region, including my own. Beth is a longtime friend and partner of S.E.L.F. And some of you might know she was the first person that I went to with this idea when I had it, back many years ago when it was still just an idea. Beth has been a guest of more panels and webinars that I can really remember. And I actually didn't bother to go back and count because I was like, there's just too many, I can't figure it out. So I didn't do that. And we're really excited to welcome her back this evening. So welcome, Beth.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back again and to be with everyone tonight.
Finally, this would not be a webinar, like I said, without a disclaimer. So here it is. This webinar panel is presented for informational purposes only. This webinar is intended as a resource for families who are navigating the special education system in Connecticut or New York and is not intended to provide legal support, advice, or assistance to any particular individual, nor is it intended to replace the advice and counsel of a qualified special education attorney. Families in need of legal assistance, advice, support should contact a special education attorney licensed to practice in their state of residence to discuss the specific needs of their individual student. This webinar should not be construed as an endorsement by Special Education Legal Fund or any of its representatives of any of the participating attorneys, advocates, or other professionals in the panel, nor should it be construed as an endorsement of any school or school representative invited to appear on the panel. So there we go. And here we are. So I am really, really excited to have this discussion about, executive functioning challenges, because I feel like it's something that a lot of people talk about, but few people really know what it is. So can each of you say the first three words that come to your mind when someone says executive function? Who wants to go first?
Dysfunction.
Beth, Ellen, anyone?
Dysfunction.
Ellen? Dysfunction. That's only one. You need two more.
Yeah, let's say it 3 times.
Then I can follow that with keeping your stuff together, for lack of a better word.
Yep.
That's really what it is.
Lack of control. All kinds of control.
Initiation for
Regulation.
tasks or
Right.
Yep, I was gonna say
Impulsivity.
Planning.
Mine is chunking. That's what I always think of when I think of executive functioning challenges. Lauren, you're quiet there in the corner. What's your three words?
Regulation and modulation, which are sort of two sides of the same coin. And I was also going to use control. So.
Well, let's start with, the idea of, I think all of you talked a little bit about organization, whether it's the organization ideas or stuff or, daily activities. Lauren, from your perspective as a psychologist, as a clinical psychologist, what is executive function and how do you identify in the diagnostic process that a student has executive function challenges?
Yeah, so executive functions are so big. It's such a huge topic, honestly, because it affects every part of our day. I won't go into the science and the brain. I'll just talk about what it looks like. It basically, when I think of executive functions, I think of it as the brain's control center, and I start singing David Bowie, ground control. Anyway.
That's a good one.
Yes, but it encompasses, you talked about organization, it encompasses the abilities to plan, to initiate tasks, that was one of the words brought up, to follow through on tasks, to shift your attention when you need to move on to something different, to prioritize things, to filter out the distractions in the room, control, as I said, controlling your impulses.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that one of the ones that we as psychologists talk about a lot and see a lot for kids with executive function difficulties has to do with working memory. And that's not something that we naturally think about as problematic. We think about the messy room and the backpack with papers all over the place, but it's also, that's a big part of what affects school is this working memory, is sort of taking in information, sorting it through it, and then spitting it out in a way that it needs to be spit out, which is not necessarily the way it went in. So that's a big part of it. In terms of identifying it, it's honestly super tricky. I certainly administer tools that measure executive functions, and I do it because I sort of have to. I don't think that it's the same as the natural environment. I think when we really see the difficulties, it's when we look at the natural environment. So I rely a ton on parents and schools and kids when they're old enough to identify it themselves, when they're able to talk about it. I think honestly, that's the best way. And we often go into classrooms to observe when we're testing a child. So that's also really helpful.
That's so interesting that you mentioned that. Do you feel like students, or kids have the awareness to be like, I mean, I just find that, at least, in my experience, kids don't often, say like, I have anxiety, or, I have executive function challenges. They're like, I don't, I have a stomach ache, or, I don't know anywhere any of my stuff is, so how do they kind of, verbalize that to you in that context?
Yeah, they won't say I have executive function difficulties,
Right.
But they will say, they will potentially talk about how hard it is to keep track of their belongings, how they might forget. I hear this a lot from students. I do my homework, but then I forget to turn it in. So that's something that comes up a lot.
Yeah. Can each of you describe how you you see students with executive functioning needs, in your environment, in your work, and how those, challenges affect different parts of the day, whether they be at school or at home, or, whatever. Who wants to go first? Jeanette, you're unmuted, so I'm going to call on you.
Yeah, I'll go. Okay. Yeah, I can speak to that from a teacher's point of view for sure. The students with the executive functioning issues, they are your students who are always a few steps behind the agenda. They often are arriving late to class. It probably is going to take them longer to get themselves set up when they arrive, because, these issues have impacted their packing up from the previous class. Things are kind of shoved haphazardly into their binder. You're asking them, you may have some setup procedure displayed on the active board. And I'm speaking from the perspective of a teacher who works with students who have a language-based learning disability. So let's add that in too. So they may be having trouble processing the multi-step directions. We do have strategies we use for that, but that aside, these are the students who often, by the time they have found the materials and they've got their homework out, the rest of the class has kind of moved on, or they never do quite find the homework. Our previous panelists just said they're the ones who do the homework and then forget to turn it in. They forget to print it. 100%, absolutely. The other manifestation that we see, and, it doesn't quite catch up, because then for the remainder of the class, they continue to sort of be a few steps behind, and then they're rushing to pack up from this class, and everything gets thrown, haphazardly again into the book bag, and then we're set up to repeat in the next class. But the other manifestation that we see in these kids that is kind of a big piece of it too, is we see anxiety. Because they feel that they're a few steps behind. And there's a feeling of just not quite being in control of their day. It's like water slipping through their hands throughout the day. So there's an
it's like when
anxiety.
you're running late,
Definitely.
when you're running late, you're always like feeling
right.
like
And that's when you can't, imagine your car alarm, who remembers that? Your car alarm goes off in the middle of the night or something, and your neighbors are yelling out the window, come on, turn it on. And you can't get it to turn off. And now you're trying to read the car manual, but you're a mess. And, that's how they feel. And we see it.
And
That's
if I, and to add to Jeanette, and you mentioned the anxiety word, I think that it's also seen because a lot of, our kids with executive function are very bright and capable students. They're just
yeah.
overwhelmed due to all the things that Lauren so clearly stated, right? That working memory piece, the initiation, we see so many students that if you say, we're going to, talk about writing a research paper and that's shut down. These are the kids that shut down because they can't take what's big and see it as manageable, smaller units. And they become so overwhelmed due to that disorganization, due to that inability to shift. And also from negative experiences that many students come to us with prior to places unlike an Eagle Hill or Maggie, and where schools understand how to help kids with executive function challenges and how to teach students to break down those big pieces. At our open houses, I always ask, how many people are the homework police? And all the, so many parents raise their hands because they're the ones that are sitting there keeping their kids afloat, right? Trying to turn off the alarm that's ringing in the middle of the night.
right.
So that, but that's really band-aiding, right? I say, that's okay. We're the professionals. We're here to help give those tools. But I think that anxiety is something that isn't just from catch up, as you mentioned, but also just how come I'm smart? How come I understand it? How come I can learn, but I can't produce what I know? I can't get that product. And that can create a lot of anxiety. So we see a lot of that at Winston.
Yeah.
Maggie, can you talk a little bit more about that? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to expand on that too, because I think there's something that also happens with students that we see, and that's task inflation, this overestimation of how much time it's going to take them to do something that they almost avoid it completely. And I think that definitely is a big factor to the anxiety piece. And then I think there's also task deflation, where they think they can just do it so quickly and they forget the steps that it takes to complete it. So, Jeanette, you mentioned getting to class on time, remembering to get their homework, and remembering they might have to take the long way today and go up the other staircase, and all those little steps to get to a place on time. A lot of us will think about, okay, we have to be somewhere at 7, so we should probably leave 20 minutes before because there might be traffic on 95. They're not thinking in that same way with all of those steps in between. So that's one of the things that we see pretty frequently. And that pit in your stomach of I'm going to be late, there's that anxiety showing up again, and kind of the inflation.
They kind of have that all the time,
Yes.
Right. And I think that's the frustration to families is, well, where's your problem solving? It happened before. Why, did you learn from last time? But that, being able to connect and organize and shift. And, Dr. Lydia Seufer, Lauren, you also said, gave a presentation at school, and she said about executive function as well. And she mentioned that, executive function is the traffic controller. Right. And that's, imagine what that traffic controller does to navigate and make sure that planes take off and land safely. And it's a second to second decision. And that's, so that there's so many pieces, as Lauren described, and it's that air traffic controller of the brain. And once you don't have control of that, that's where we see that anxiety, because kids feel out of control. They feel pressured, and they also feel frustrated because they understand, they just can't get the product.
Right. Ellen, can you talk a little bit about, Ellen, can you talk a little bit about how it manifests in like outside of school, in the home, like getting ready, like all the things that one has to do to be productive during the day?
So 2 words that come to mind are impulsivity and prioritizing. And a lot of kids with executive function don't have the ability to manage their own impulsivity. So when they're walking down the hall, they're noticing a new drawing on the wall because they are bright and they're observant, and they want to give that their attention, forgetting that it takes them 5 minutes to get from class to class, and they're already 3 minutes behind. Or in a case of a research paper, it's so much, they don't know where to start and how to prioritize. And so I think it was, somebody said something about chunking. Maybe it was you who said it.
That was me, yeah.
I try to, what I think of what I do is helping kids and families form better habits. So where I don't think of it as helicopter parenting, I think of it as supporting, and I'm constantly checking in with the kids that I'm coaching. Are you actually doing what you're supposed to be doing? Because we're sitting here only an hour a week. And if you're off, thinking about what you're going to have for snack when you leave here, then we haven't used the hour successfully. And I also try to talk to the parents. I haven't since COVID, but I used to go into people's homes, and it was really interesting. It's you have to sit with your kid who's like this. They aren't really independent. You don't have to do their homework. You don't have to do the correct thing. But I do recommend, if they're doing their homework, have them do it at the kitchen table, read a book while they're doing it, but sit there so that you can monitor. Especially younger kids need that habit of, hey, let's come back, or we'll set a timer. If you think to your, Maggie, what you said, let's figure out what the timing is, because these kids don't have any sense of timing, either over or under. So let's go through what you've got due tomorrow. Give me numbers. I don't care what the numbers are, but assign numbers to each, each thing that you have to do. And then we'll time it and we'll see whether you're right or wrong. It's not a good or bad. We're just going to see. And then as the year goes on, they should be better and better at estimating their time. And so things get better. One thing that happens, it occurred to me tonight, I was tutoring earlier, is it's huge. These kids get behind really quickly. And then you're digging out of a hole. And everybody's upset. And to everything that everybody said, these kids only want to succeed. And the minute they've gotten into a hole, they either don't tell you they're in a hole and they get further in a hole, or they're ashamed of getting in a hole and you have to figure out how. And it's really difficult. But I had a student I worked with last year who was like 45 assignments behind, which sounds enormous.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it wasn't, because they were really little assignments, and it was just before a March break. And so we spent most of the time she was with me figuring out how many assignments could she do each night that wouldn't overtax her. And that's what she was going to do to get them through in the time needed. I was lucky she happened to be a high school student. She had an iPhone. I texted her every night, reminding her. And then I had her text me when she, sent in the 5 or 7 that would due that night. And I'd send her some kind of emoji or fun cartoon or something. And that way we built a rapport and she felt good. And somebody's both on her side and cheering for her at the same time. So,
and providing like a little bit of the scaffolding that's necessary,
right.
before one learns,
right.
What
it happened to be foreign language assignments, and I didn't speak the foreign language. So I'm not doing anything other than just saying, okay, you got 5 to do. They're going to each take you 10 minutes,
and
that's
chunking
minutes
that very large task and making it smaller,
right.
Which is like, really, I think, for me, that was the thing that, that really helped me understand what this, an EF challenge was and how to kind of manage it in the home, because I didn't realize until Elisa Rhodey, told me basically that, she's like, you just gave like a 10-step, a 10-step series of things to do without realizing it. It's like, go upstairs, get the crayons, bring the crayons downstairs, like get the paper, there were like a whole series of things. And, and she was like, break it up. Make it smaller, make it manageable, and then once you can manage those smaller pieces, you can take on larger pieces and it, kind of grows from there. You did mention, Ellen, and I'd love for the panel to expand on this. How do executive function challenges manifest differently for different age groups? maybe each one of you can kind of talk about, a different age group. Like, Jeanette, I think you work with, younger middle school kid, so like, what does it look like for kids in elementary school? What does it look like in middle school? What does it look like in high school? How are the ways in which these challenges, appear? And then, kind of how do you, this is a long question. Sorry, I should have chunked it. And then how do you, help kids in those age groups with appropriate strategies?
Sure. I can speak to middle school, but I don't know if you want to start with elementary school and work up, or
Somebody start with elementary school.
I can
Lauren,
say
that's
just-
you.
Sure,
All
I wanted to say this actually, that one of the things that we hadn't touched upon is just how, well, we have, but how stressful it is on the parents, because it often starts, especially for elementary school kids, it often starts right off the bat in the morning when you're trying to get them ready for school. And you've got, they've got to get the right clothing, they've got to pack their backpacks. And meanwhile, they're watching something on their iPad and you can't get them to focus on eating breakfast, and shifting away from that thing on the iPad and moving on to the thing they have to do. So merely getting out the door with shoes actually on can be very, very difficult. And so it starts off exactly that way. And then when the elementary school child gets to school, I think somebody talked about, what happens when they get to school. Do they know the routine? Do they remember the routine and go, put their things in their cubby, go do their morning, grab their morning packet, go to their seat, blah, blah, blah. Or do they, start socializing with their friends and plop their backpack down in the middle of the hallway and this and that. So I think that's where the elementary school child, it's less about the academics, I think, than we're going to talk about with the middle and the high school kids. It's more so about day-to-day living.
Okay, I can piggyback then and talk a little bit about middle school. Sure. I think there are a couple of significant changes that happen when children reach, even upper elementary school into middle school. One is that often the schedules get complicated, so they may not have the same schedule every day anymore. So that is a lot right there for them to keep track of. Plus, in elementary school, they may sort of have a teacher leading them through the day, where now they're having to navigate this independently. So that already, even for children who don't have executive functioning issues, this is something that is a new hurdle. And then also the homework becomes a little less predictable. Maybe it's not, a worksheet every night for each class. Maybe now it's a more multifaceted assignment. It might be a long-term assignment. So this is where that chunking comes in. Yeah, so, all of these things. And I just want to mention, the idea of, I think it was Dr. Riordan just mentioned about getting somebody, out the door, elementary school, that continues to for middle school, of course. And it's not just helping the children to be able to get packed up and off to school, which is happening at home. But then when they come into the classroom, they're going from class to class, and the setup procedure might look different now from class to class. So, we have a couple of, we had a wonderful executive functioning expert come in years ago named Sarah Ward, who did an in-service with us. And we all, many of us this fall did a refresher online. And, she talks about some great strategies there. There are many teachers at Eagle Hill who, rather than having a setup procedure in words, because remember, we are a school for students who have a language-based learning disability, there are many teachers who will have up on the active board a picture of what it looks like to be ready, and just say match the picture, which takes the language load out. And now that it's visual, it just, it's just easier for them to process. They just have to match what they see. Several panelists so far have mentioned the issue of not having a sense of time. That is so true. And so, and I think part of it, Sarah Ward pointed out, is that these students don't know how to read an analog clock anymore. And when you watch time pass on an analog clock, you have a sense of time passing. Whereas on a digital clock, you don't have that same sense of the sweeping of the time. So these are things that can be directly instructed, and we spend time doing that. Some of us even have what we call a working clock versus the time clock on the wall. And we'll actually draw on the clock and say, well, we're going to spend 10 minutes on this. Look, this looks like this. And we'll take an expo pen and draw it out and say, here's 5 minutes, here's 10 minutes, and then color that in, and then after we're done with that, you're going to have 15 minutes to do independent work. That looks like this, 5, 10, 15. And we color that in a different color. So the clock ends up looking like a pie chart where different colors represent different segments of time. And I think that, by doing things like that, you can start to have them develop a more realistic idea of how long things take. Because as other panelists have pointed out, you may say to them, you've got 10 minutes left in study hall, what do you think you can get done? Some will say nothing. I had this with a student today. Can I pack up? There's only 10 minutes left. Well, you got an entire subject done in 10 minutes a moment ago. So no, you can't pack up. 10 minutes is a long time. They don't sense that. And then there's others who it's the other way. They think they can get an hour's worth of work done in 10 minutes. So, anything we can do to help them to develop a reasonable sense of time, I think is
helpful,
really important for them.
Beth
as
and
they
Maggie.
enter middle school for their plan, and also directly teaching backwards design. They don't understand that, here's the finished product, here's where you need to go. What do you need to do that? What are the steps? What materials do you need to do that?
Sure.
It needs to be directly instructed.
Perfect.
It's a great strategy for that called Ready, Do, Done.
Yes,
where
that's what we use. Yep. Sarah Ward. Yeah.
Here's the final product. Let's work backwards. Right. And I find that's very helpful for kids with EF. In the high school, I think it's, again, just targeting that preparedness, the academic stamina. Students are now in high school. We know how quickly time goes by because we can read the clock. But, then that in junior year, you're starting to talk about the next step. So getting kids to kind of generalize skills and awareness to what's challenging for them and to give that direct instruction. But I think that's the academic piece, is learning how to study, learning time management and organization, learning how to write a paper. Those things that are lengthier are really important skills that kids have to leave with. But that's the academic piece. Socially, you see a lot of that impulsivity kicks in. And that's where it's, I want a girlfriend, tag, you're it. And not understanding, how do you develop that relationship, that this takes time, again, that kind of, and utilizing, and that being flexible, understanding that, it does take time. And that's another thing, is the flexibility and task initiation. How do you initiate a relationship with someone? And what is the friendship pyramid? And what does that look like? And so I think socially, and the impulsivity with the phone and all the horrors that come along with that. So I think that when we get into the older years, although I'm sure this happens across the board, maybe not elementary, but and as far as leaving the house without shoes, as Lauren mentioned, I think shoes are important in high school. Sneakers are important, so that they remember. However, it's getting kids out of bed and to school. And that's, I know that Maggie's program responds to that very, very well. So I think just the social piece and the academic stamina are really important components to help kids prepare for the future.
Maggie?
Yeah, I'd agree with you, Beth. I also think that it's a wide range in high school, right? So you see kids at age 14 all the way through age 18, and you're seeing them develop at different paces. You're seeing them manage their tasks and their skills and their time and everything at really different paces year over year. We always try to get students to get jobs throughout that 16, 17 year, because it's a different way to approach executive functioning. Somebody had mentioned, excuse me, in the questions, how do you motivate? And I think that's coming at it from another approach, where I think that they, excuse me, I'm going to have to cough. Sorry about that. I think it's motivating them in a different way, where you have said it as the parent, we have said it at school, and now boss is saying it too. So giving feedback and a healthy place for them to fail while they're still in high school and in those formative years, then they take those skills from work and they get a reward and they start to apply them at school. And we start to see a shift around 16, 17 that makes all the difference for their junior and senior years.
Which are such important years. Ellen, I have a question for you, that I'm going to pull out of the chat. How do you, it's a follow-on of this, how do you motivate a student with executive functioning challenges, but how do you, what's a potential course of action when a student has been receiving, weekly support from an EF coach, but the student's still demonstrating some work avoidance? How can a coach support that, when the student is only seeing them once a week?
So I saw that in the questions, and it's actually something that I'm doing right now, and it's a 3-pronged stool. I'm only one support in the stool. Right. Parents and school are the other, and it has to be a 3-way conversation. And back to what I said earlier, it's not very different than any kind of therapy, where if I see them once a week, I can only do what I can do once a week. As they get older and I have more access, I will check in and encourage and monitor and cheerlead. But when they're smaller, and I don't really take on elementary school kids anymore, or middle school kids, it's harder. The parents really have to, it really becomes a second job. And I'm not sure if you experienced that, but I certainly did. My twins are 26 now. And I recently I got into this through Lauren, but also Lauren started testing my kids, I don't know, back when they were in first grade. And I recently, an old executive function tutor for one of my sons recently reached out to me, and we had a long conversation about what he's accomplished. And she said to me, he wouldn't be where he is if not for you, Ellen. If you hadn't sort of taken the time to do what you did all the time and be on top of it and also advocate for him. So there's lots of times where you're ready to cry and you go into school because school is saying, his pants are on backwards. He hasn't handed in any of the homework, he hasn't done this, he hasn't done that. And then, well, how are his ERBs? Well, they're, top of the class. How is this? That's top of the class. So you have to sort of figure out individually how to work with each family and each child to support them. But it's a 3-way conversation, and there has to be a little give.
And kids also have to feel successful, right? The minute is like you're mentioning, Ellen, your students. I think when kids feel successful because they haven't had that success, and they see that they are capable, that's motivating, right? For all of us, right? We feel successful at something. And I think that empowering kids, when we work with our older students, I'll sit down and go over and say, look, your verbal comprehension is high. Like, you're right. You're smart. You're a curious learner. You're actually a good student in your head. But, it's the product that is so difficult. It's
like, don't you want to get credit for it? Don't
right. But, let's figure out how you can show what you've got. I'm going to show you how and give you the tools. So I think just like telling kids, like, it's your processing speed. It's not you, it's your processing speed. But kind of sometimes going over evaluations, and again, not very deeply, but to the sense that they can understand, this is what you're really good at, this, and this, and this is what's getting in the way. And we're going to give you the tools to learn how to make it better, so you can show what you've got and you don't feel that frustration and anxiety when you cannot produce what you know. And I think that's, when kids feel successful and they get those tools, well, that is motivating, and that's how you get into school.
Also, what's the carrot for any kid, any age, instead of the beating them up? What's the carrot? Okay, you've gotten into the hole. You're not it looks like you're not motivated, but I know you want to be successful. So I can't do this for you. How are we going to do it together? What's going to get you to hand in your homework every day? When they're younger, you have to come up with things to offer them. But when they're a little older, they will have either been, they should know what's gonna be the thing.
Right.
Is it that I have to tell you every morning to do this till you get it?
Yep.
Or is it that, I remind you, figure it out.
We just did a little chunking activity in my own house because I make lunch for both of my kids, before they go to school, because for a variety of reasons, they don't want to eat like what's provided at school. And for, weeks, it was like, putting the lunch together on the, at the beginning there, you've got the lunch is all like packed up in the bag and, ready on the counter. And then it was like, okay, well, let's put the lunch on the counter next to the bag and have them put the, the stuff in the bag and then go with it. And then you're like, and then you move to the point where, and which we are now, where, everything's in the fridge, they have to do that. And so we gradually did that so that they would like incorporate that and then realize that like, okay, well, the lunch is not going to be there. I have to like come down. I have to figure this out. Like I have to allow 2 minutes to do this because, which I wasn't allowing before, so that I have to plan. And that kind of like, this is a very small and simple like type of thing. But, I feel like it's, even for high school students, it's, it's something that, that you're kind of working on, sort of on a, on a daily basis, with the skills that they're trying to, to achieve.
Targeting all the skills, initiation of task,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Completion of task, sequencing of task.
Yep.
You're talking about time management, organization, planning, right? Ready, do, done. Here's the sandwich. How do you get
exactly? I'm like, you didn't even make the sandwich. I made the sandwich, maybe that's the next step is making the sandwich,
I think so.
Christine, I think the other thing that's so great about your example is it was that gradual release of responsibility to them, and that's so important. And also just someone else was just speaking about letting them be in on understanding, what these executive functioning issues mean, educating them about it. And I just want to say that is also so important because you're teaching them to be advocates for themselves when they understand, how their brain works and what it is that they need.
Right.
We love that, when they come into the classroom and they can advocate for themselves. That's a big goal that we have for them. So it's wonderful that they're, getting that from coaches and
we, we've danced a little bit around the topic of college and, and preparing for college. And there's a question in, kind of the, there's a couple questions in the, in the chat about, about that, kind of process. Like, what do you do, because obviously, college is that sort of next step. Like, what do you do in preparation for, getting a child ready to, not only succeed in, with their, with their academic work, but with their, their sort of activities of daily living, in a more independent format. Does anyone want to kind of weigh in on, on that?
I can weigh in. I mentioned before, we encourage our students to get a job of some sort. And one, they have a motivation, they have somebody else, kind of a clean slate outside of school and outside of the home, something that they're working towards. And I think it's also good for them to get real-time success too. So they have that, they have these little successes, they, start to show up on time, or they know what it's like to feel good, or even if they have to have a feedback conversation with the boss about being late or not getting something done, I think it just lands differently for them. And I think that's a great transition step for them. We at Fusion try to start the conversation of post-secondary, what they're looking to do after high school early, start that conversation in 9th and 10th grade and try to desensitize it, because I think, we work with a lot of students with anxiety, and change is scary and you have to have a lot of courage to do it. And I think the more we can start to talk about it, and they can talk with alumni and other students and other, family members and staff members about what that transition looks like, and start to integrate it, work backwards, right? We're talking about having a vision and then setting up all the details and the steps working towards it, the more we can do that and the more we can reference real life examples to that, whether it's their job or when you're in college or, when you're working in the real world, anything that we can bring in that resonates with them about real world functions, I think is the most important, and it lands best for them.
Mhm. Absolutely. I've got a couple questions in the chat. The first are, at what age does an executive function coach make sense for children? I guess that's what's the earliest age is sort of the implied question.
I've worked with kids as young as second grade and found that I don't think I'm the person for them. I think that, behavioral therapist or OT or just sort of play therapy is better, because it's sort of what Jeanette said. I'm just doing worksheets and there's not enough there to help form a habit. And it's about structure of the home and getting out and getting back to school and bath time and getting to bed. And that's all stuff that I can talk about, but I can't really in once a week setting help with that. I feel like 5th, 6th, 7th grade is really 6th and 7th grade are really where you should start.
Perfect. That's super. In a public school setting, who can provide executive functioning support to a student? Is it the school psychologist? Is it, the OT? Like, how is that support provided, in a public school setting?
It's a tricky question. Mostly in a public school setting, it's provided through accommodations, and it'll say maybe on their IEP or a 504 plan, give the child one worksheet at a time, or something like that.
Visual schedule,
exactly. Visual schedules, timers, things like that. Occasionally they
preferential seating, maybe, stuff like that. Okay.
All those things. I mean, it's really, really much more so through accommodations. There are, times when they will work directly on executive functions in, a support session, an academic support session. But again, it's usually because it's around that academic task. So they might be able to say, okay, you've got this research paper, let's break it down into these chunks, and how are we going to attack this, and map out a plan.
Perfect. I am curious as to how impulsivity, or how do you support a child whose impulsivity and executive function are impacting their ability to to socialize appropriately and and make friends? How do you support a child with that with that kind of challenge?
So there are things called, there is the friendship pyramid, which we utilize and try to discuss. What's someone you've just met, and then how do they become an acquaintance, and how do they become a friend, and then how do they become a good friend? Because that impulsivity, as I said, I want a girlfriend, or I want that person to be my friend, and there are so many social risks that can be taken that can be of concern to feel that popularity, to feel that connection. So I think that kind of it's a lot of dialogue, it's a lot of discussion, it's a lot of problem solving, and it's also sequencing. Teaching our kids, this is first step. Why don't we try this? And then go to the second step, and learning what are your expectations and how can we get there. And again, it's like what's the carrot, what are you looking for? But we're going to have to break down how to get there. And having kids, I found some of our executive function kids, I asked them, I said, why don't you write down what you're thinking or what it is that you want? Because even just that slowing down, that additional moment of having to write something and organizing that thought for written work versus a verbal task,
makes them think about what
it can sometimes slow kids down. So again, it depends upon the student, of course, but that can be helpful. And sometimes parents have even shared that works at home too. Rather than getting into the verbal battle and the frustration, kind of just write down what you're thinking and what it is that you want, and then let's break it down. So I think socially, just explaining to kids, and also, for older kids or high school students, we just had a wellness week of, we had professionals come in and talk about, how impulsive behavior can, be very damaging to students, and to our kids, and in many ways. So kind of, how important it is to stop and think, stop and think.
Yeah, I'd further.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say just one final thought with Beth, that making sure that they have a trusted person at school too, because that only works if they trust what you're saying to talk through with you. So making sure that they have an adult or somebody at school that they have that trust, that relationship with, so that they're receptive to kind of how they got to the situation and winding back and figuring out those steps.
Perfect. There's a question in the chat about iPhones, and and we've referenced iPhones and iPads a couple times in this conversation, and video games. Let's just go the whole gamut. How do those things affect executive function? Is it better for children, with executive functioning challenges to have less screen time or no screen time?
I'm not a proponent of no screen time. I think it's hard in our day and age to not have screens. First of all, so many of the kids need them for their homework anyway, but it's also a social avenue. So for those kids that are struggling socially, if they don't have the vocabulary because they play the game that everybody's playing, then that's going to be a problem. I think there are also ways in which we can utilize them for the good. Because there are a lot of amazing apps that can be used for helping the kids, prioritize and chunk their time and things like that. So those can be sort of the carrot, as Ellen mentioned. If you want to use this, I remember saying to my son, when he wanted an iPhone and his sisters didn't have one, I said, look, you will get an iPhone if you promise to set up Google Calendar and you use it. And otherwise you're not getting one. So it was a great carrot for him, because he had multiple activities going on and I wanted him to start managing it himself. And so there is good. Obviously, should we limit? I think so. I think that's true for anything, that is desirable. It needs to be limits, except for chocolate. So
and I think structure and scheduling, limitations on the phone time-wise are helpful for kids. Like, EF kids going to bed with their phones, I'm just not sure, from my experience, is not helpful. They're too impulsive. They're wondering what they're missing. It's and
it stops them from getting up, from getting the morning.
Right. And then they can't get up in the morning because they've been on their phone at 2 o'clock in the middle of the night. So I think structure is very helpful for kids with EF and schedules. And if they know, this is the rule, 10 o'clock at night, I get it, I charge it, you get it in the morning. So things like that, I think, would be beneficial. But I agree with Lauren that there are a lot of apps that are very helpful regarding scheduling, prioritizing for our kids.
But talking about college, you can't go to college without a phone.
Right. 100%.
And without knowing how to use it. And the other thing that all these kids know quickly, or should learn quickly, is there's apps to shut everything down, where they're on their computer or they're on their phone, and the only thing they can access is the homework or the websites with the resources. But again, my kids are older, but I remember Quizlets, and they used to study together. They'd all be in their own house, but they'd be having study sessions that were really helpful. And there's lots of good uses of technology. And they have to learn. When they're younger, they're not going to know how, but as they get older, they have to learn how to manage that, so they do use it to the best of its ability. And they're going to be always way better at doing that than we are, because they're basically born now with iPhones in their hands, and
knowing how
at least for some of us who are older, we're not.
I spent time this morning with my tutorial class teaching them how to set up reminders that would pop up on their Chromebook.
Mhm.
And I showed them all the reminders that I have on mine that pop up, you
Mhm.
know, at certain times of the day. And I explained to them that without those, I would forget to do a whole lot of things. So yeah, I mean, they can certainly be very useful. Somebody did mention though about the screen time and the lack of sleep. I think that is a real problem that that our teenagers are living with. I mean, there is just they are not sleeping enough. There were a group of us that went to a Learning in the Brain conference back in November, and you know, several things came through loud and clear about the screen time. And I think one of the biggest takeaways was that these kids they're sleep deprived because of screens, and that's a dangerous thing for their brain.
Yeah, sometimes it's also helping them look at the data too. So you bring up screen time, but you can look at that on your iPhone and look at it over weeks and look at it over months. I think that's a really powerful conversation for either an educator, or an EF coach, or a parent to have with them. Let's take a look at the correlation. Did you know that you spent 7 hours on TikTok last week? They probably don't, because they're just, you know, they're having fun, they're enjoying it, they're laughing, they're learning things, but they don't understand what a crutch it can be, and what else could you have done with 7 hours, and just kind of play with that thought, you know, and help them realize, because, you know, we're talking about kids with these struggles, they're not understanding that impulsivity, they're not understanding how long they're actually on it.
Because they're all everything is designed to give you, you know, a dopamine rush, you know, so that makes it really hard, you know, particularly for, you know, a young person to, you know, to tear yourself away from a situation where, you know, you're kind of, you know, you're feeding that, you know, that feeling for yourself. And I certainly think, you know, it's important, you know, like with all of the things that, you know, everybody's been talking about, is to, you know, is to get your child, you know, your child, your student, you know, to recognize what they're feeling, you know, and to be able to like kind of articulate it and name it. And when they can do that effectively, then, you know, that's kind of the first step to, you know, to like, you know, wrapping your arms around the problem of, you know, or the, you know, and finding the solution. I've got an interesting question in the chat where, you know, the question is, how do you help a teenager who has started to use his diagnosis as a bit of a crutch? He's almost playing victim instead of wanting to help himself. This is a little bit broader than an executive function question, but I wanted the answer to it. I'd like the answer to it. I've always, you know, it's a curious question for me. So who wants to tackle that one? The psychologist, I think, looks ripe to answer this question.
Oh, gosh. You know, that's a really hard question. I think that it's a fine line between sort of giving them the, you know, we were talking about sort of explaining their difficulties to them so that they understand them, and so that it empowers them, you know, to be able to say, you've got this amazing brain and you have such big ideas, and your ideas go here and there and everywhere. But the problem is sometimes you can't rein them in, and you can't focus on the one you need to focus on at that moment. And I think that, you know, it's just, again, sort of talking through with this kiddo like that, like, absolutely, this is an issue that you have. And what can we do now to, you know, we still have to work on, you know, homework, and we still have to get things done. So how can we use some of your amazing skills to back up this area in which you struggle? So, I mean, it's tough. So
I think somebody said earlier also that there's nothing like a taste of success. Success feels better than anything else.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that helps them to, you know, when they can start actually utilizing strategies that they're being taught and get that little taste of success, maybe that's the best way to let them start letting go of using this as an excuse and say, well, look what I can do though, you know.
And how I can be successful.
Yeah.
I think there's also a component we haven't really talked about, which is many EF kids have other things going on.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
we
We have not
discussed
talked about that. Yeah.
Right. We've discussed the anxiety.
Mhm.
We've discussed, you know, working memory.
Mhm.
There's language processing. There's a whole bunch of different things that
There's
a lot of
autism, there's ADHD, there's
Right.
all these other things.
there's a lot of stuff. And I know in my experience, something like that, that's for therapy.
Mhm. Yeah.
Let's go talk to your therapist about that.
Yeah.
Because that's, you know, there's, I joke when somebody hires me, at least one day a week, they don't have to be Attila the mom. And
Yeah.
take on the problems. And I think that talking to the parents, and as a parent, that's something that you have to remember is there's lots of people to help you, and
Mhm.
find the person who's going to help your child the most
Mhm.
and ask them to help.
Ellen, you have talked a little bit about parents, and their roles. We really started out this conversation with you talking about, sitting with your child while they are doing their work, not doing the work for them, but sitting with them as kind of the executive secretary, for want of a better word. And you're providing guidance on all of the organization and planning and stuff like that. Can you talk about, parents in, using that strategy and how it might evolve over the child's life, so that you can kind of peel off the support, when it's necessary, and allow your child to achieve the, appropriate levels of independence and success and completion?
So I was thinking about this recently. My mother said at one point, they'll grow up, Ellen. And it's really hard to remember when they're little that they're going to grow up, and you're really deep into it. And they do. And just the same way that you teach them to make a bed, or you teach them how to get dressed, it's sort of like, oh my gosh, how long am I going to have to do this? And then maybe one night you realize, you can't sit with them, and you've gone out to a parent teacher conference, or you've gone out and had dinner with a friend because you're just burnt out. And you come home to find out that they did the homework because you've put the hours in, and they recognize that they want to be successful. And so I don't think that's the hard part, is it's not happening in 2 weeks.
Right.
It's not happening in 2 months. It might be a couple of years. It might be more than a couple of years, but it's sort of slowly over time. They grow up, and you look back and you say, oh, yeah, hey, things have started to shift. I think summers and sort of responsibility during summers help a lot too, to not have that backslide. And maybe when they're younger, taking care of younger siblings, or playing with cousins, or, having somebody else assign them responsibilities. And we sort of touched on it. These kind of kids especially respond to people who love them and think they're great. And the more experiences you can give them like that, the more successful they'll be. And then all of a sudden they want to be successful in other areas. And you sort of just see it slowly happening.
Perfect. Thank you all so much. We are, just about, 8:10. So I'm going to ask, our panelists, sort of our last few questions for the evening. One of the questions which I think is coming through is how do you educate teachers about executive functioning challenges, particularly in young children, but also in middle school and and older, in helping them or understand that, the child isn't necessarily just being negative. It's not necessarily that the child's acting out or being negative or choosing lack of completion. How does one, help the teacher or the school team or anyone who's working with the child understand that about the student.
I think somebody brought up before, you know, how we do have to advocate for our kids. And so it isn't, I think Ellen talked about the sort of the three-pronged stool, and there's a partnership, and it's really important to cultivate that partnership with your school and to be able to talk through with them. We understand exactly what is happening here because we experience it at home. And here are some things that we have found helpful. And, you know, but it's really important that they not place the child in a position where this child is feeling terrible about themselves. So it's, I mean, I think it's really important to jump in pretty quickly if you're getting that kind of feedback, and make sure that they are, you maybe loop in the school psychologist who can help, and be sort of a educator in the classroom, or an outside person who can come in and do some consultation. But I think that's actually super important, that we don't make our kids feel terrible about themselves. So.
And then trying to have those supports that you mentioned in the accommodation support in, you know, in a 504 plan type of, you know, arrangement will provide, you know, some support, you know, at least hopefully some support with chunking and with task breakdown and with, you know, understanding, you know, what, you know, the child might need at that, you know, you know, level. But that's super helpful. Well, I am really, you know, thrilled that everyone, you know, joined us. We had great questions and great, you know, feedback and really great interaction with this panel. I'd like to thank Jeanette Glover, Beth Sugerman, Dr. Lauren Riordan, Ellen Levenson, and Maggie Gregory for joining us this evening. A silent shout out to Bill DeHaven, who was not able to join us due to his technical issues. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening. As a reminder, our next webinar is May 3rd on preparing students for college. And we look forward to seeing you all there. Thanks so much and have a great evening. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Good to see you.